Lena had always considered herself a good person. She had a stable job, a loving husband, and a beautiful home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. She had always done everything by the book, always following the rules and never stepping out of line. That was until 5 years ago, when she had committed a terrible crime that would haunt her for the rest of her life. It was a hot summer night when Lena had gotten into an argument with her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins. Lena had always thought that Mrs. Jenkins was a nosy, meddling woman who was always prying into her personal affairs. But that night, Lena had enough. She had lost her temper, and things had quickly gotten out of hand. Before she knew it, she had grabbed a kitchen knife and plunged it into Mrs. Jenkins's chest. Lena had been horrified at what she had done. She had never been a violent person, and the sight of Mrs. Jenkins's lifeless body had shaken her to her core. She had been running from the police for years ever since the incident, losing her husband and home in the process. Lena was always on the move, but one day she came across an abandoned building out in the middle of the woods and decided to live there. Lena thought she could finally relax, but that's when the first letter arrived about a week later. Lena was confused, wondering if someone had found out where she was hiding. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and there was no return address. Lena hesitated for a moment before tearing open the envelope. The letter was short, but it sent a chill down Lena's spine. It read, "I know what you did, and I'm coming for you." Lena felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She tried to convince herself that it was just a sick prank, but she couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. Over the next few days, more letters arrived. They were always there when she woke up, all of them similar in tone, all filled with cryptic threats and promises of revenge. Lena tried to ignore them, thought about going on the run again, but she felt like she was being watched. The letters kept coming every day. Lena became increasingly paranoid. She started sleeping less and seeing things out the corner of her eyes. But whenever she did fall asleep, there was always another letter waiting. The more Lena tried to ignore them, the more they seemed to multiply. One day, Lena couldn't take it anymore. She decided to take matters into her own hands and try to uncover the identity of the person who was tormenting her. She spent hours poring over the letters, analyzing the handwriting and the paper, looking for any clue that might lead her to the sender. But the more she searched, the more confused she became. There were no fingerprints, no traceable evidence of any kind. It was as if the letters had been sent from a ghost. Lena's sanity began to unravel. She began hearing whispers in her ears and having visions Mrs. Jenkins's bloodied body lying on the floor, accusing her with empty eyes. And then one day, Lena received a letter that changed everything. It was longer than the others, and the handwriting was different. It was neat and precise, almost clinical. The letter began, "Dear Lena, I know you're scared. I know you've been receiving these letters for weeks now, and you don't know who's behind them, but I do. I know because I am you, or rather I will be you in 5 years' time." Lena was shocked. She read the letter over and over again, trying to make sense of what it said. The letter went on to explain that Lena's mind had been playing tricks on her. She had created this whole scenario in her head as a way to cope with the guilt and trauma of what she had done to Mrs. Jenkins. At first, Lena couldn't believe it, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had been struggling with her mental health ever since the murder, and the stress of the letters had only exacerbated her condition. Lena made the decision to turn herself in. She knew that she needed help, and that the only way to get it was to admit to what she had done. She went to the police station and confessed to the murder of Mrs. Jenkins, explaining everything that had happened since then. The police officers were shocked by Lena's story. They had been searching for her for years, but they had never been able to track her down. Lena's confession solved a cold case that had been haunting the department for years. Lena was placed in a psychiatric ward, where she was evaluated and treated for her mental illness. She was given medication, therapy, and a support system to help her recover. As Lena began to heal, she realized that she had been living in a state of delusion for years. She had been convinced that someone was out to get her, that she was being watched and threatened, but it was all in her head. Lena felt ashamed and embarrassed, but she was also relieved to finally understand what had been happening to her. She knew that she had a long road ahead of her, but she was committed to getting better and moving on with her life. Eventually, Lena was released from the psychiatric ward, and she started rebuilding her life from scratch. She found a new home, got a new job, and even made a few friends. She stayed in touch with her therapist, who helped her work through her trauma and manage her mental illness. Lena never forgot about what she had done, but she learned to forgive herself and move on. She knew that she couldn't change the past, but she could make the most of the present and the future. Looking back, Lena realized that she had been lucky to receive the help and support she needed. She knew that not everyone struggling with mental illness gets the same opportunities, and she felt a responsibility to help others who might be going through similar experiences. Lena started volunteering at a local mental health organization, sharing her story and offering hope to others. She realized that her experience had given her a unique perspective and a sense of purpose. Years went by, and Lena grew older. She never forgot about the letters or the murder, but she knew that they were part of her past. She was grateful for the life she had built for herself and for the second chance she had been given. As Lena lay in her bed, her thoughts drifted to the night she had killed Mrs. Jenkins. She closed her eyes and saw the blood, the knife, and the lifeless body. When she opened her eyes again, she was back in the psychiatric ward on her bed. Lena was scared, nauseous, and confused. Was it all a nightmare? She got up and ran to the bathroom to throw up. When she got to the bathroom, Lena noticed out of the corner of her eyes and noticed a figure in the mirror. It was her, but she was a teenager again. Lena realized what had happened and burst into tears. A nurse noticed all the commotion and ran in the room. "It's okay, Lena," the nurse said. "Let's get you back into bed and take your medicine." The nurse walked Lena back to her bed, and that's when Lena realized what was going on. She had been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder ever since she was a kid, and her parents put her in a psychiatric ward. Her alter ego had taken over and created a whole other reality in Lena's mind. The letters, the fear, the paranoia, it was all a product of her own delusions. As Lena lay in her bed, she realized that the past 5 years had all been a figment of her imagination. Her husband, her home, the murder, and the letters were never real. It was all in her head. The realization was a heavy blow to Lena, and she felt like she had lost everything. But at the same time, she felt a sense of relief. The weight of the guilt and trauma that had been haunting her for years was lifted, but Lena knew that the nightmares would never stop. She would end up creating a different reality in her mind again, not knowing what was real and what was fake. Lena realized she could never live a normal life and began to cry. She closed her teary eyes and drifted off to sleep, not knowing what she would wake up to and hoping that she wouldn't even wake up. That way she could finally live in peace,